You may have been here for a while on my YouTube channel and you have learnt about learning outcomes and goals and curriculums. Now I wanted to provide you with a video that looks at some tips of how you can create a structured learning journey and how these goals, competencies, and learning outcomes all fit together in your curriculum. So I've recently filmed a video for a course that I have and I wanted to provide you with that video. So let's take a look at some tips on creating a successful learning journey. Hi, my name is Kat Sabella and I am here from the Stellar Way, helping you and many other course creators be able to design, create, and launch your online course. So in this video, we're looking at the first step, designing. How can you design a successful learning journey for your students? Let's take a look. So let's start off with an example of course goals and then breaking that down into learning outcomes. So the course goal that I have here is implement an Airtable base for content creation. And you can see here that I am using the word implement. Because I'm using the technique, my students will have the ability to implement an Airtable base for content creation. Once I have that goal, I can then break that down into outcomes. And I have 4 outcomes here for you. My students will have the ability to understand the difference between an Airtable and Google Sheets. My students will have the ability to add columns to their content creation Airtable. My students will have the ability to create a calendar view. And my students will have the ability to integrate Zapier. Now with these, it is intentional that each one of these outcomes is building on top of the other. You can see that there's a nice flow that first, my students are only expected to absorb information, understand, and comprehend. So that is the knowledge part. Then they move into adding columns. At this stage, they're practicing. They might be following instructions, they might be following videos, and they might be using examples that I provide. They're only practicing at this stage. Now, when they start to understand and they start to be able to practice, then they can start to form these abilities. And these abilities are to start to create their own calendars and start to integrate different platforms to help them be able to achieve business goals. Now, to do this, it is really useful to have an idea of what type of verbs you can use. So we have knowledge, skills, and abilities. Now, this is not endless. There are many more options available for you. And in my YouTube videos, as well as in the course template that you have access to, there are examples about Bloom's taxonomy, which is what I've adapted here. I've adapted Bloom's taxonomy to talk about the levels we move through. So first we move from knowledge, which is taking in information, understanding it, and comprehending it. Then we move into practicing skills, where we start to practice and analyze. And then we move into these abilities where we start to evaluate and create. Now this is starting to build and scaffold our knowledge, and we need to design the same opportunities for our students. By doing so, you are creating a very effective learning journey that's going to help your students become successful. So when you are starting to create your competencies, and when you are creating your outcomes and your goals, consider, is this only information that my students need? Or do they need to practice skills? And is it only knowledge and skills that they need to have? Or do they need to start to form abilities? Now again, in my YouTube video, you will start to see the difference between skills and abilities. And I do have a YouTube video that speaks to that question. What's the difference between skills and abilities? To answer this question as well in this video, let's have a look at this example. So this example is taking our third learning outcome, which is create. And the specific reason why we're looking at create is that that is an ability. So I want to show you how you can create competencies that would include knowledge, skills, and abilities to help your students achieve this outcome. So, a knowledge. Recognize the best filters. We're using recognize. That means only to understand and comprehend. not to practice anything. Then we have skill. Connect the calendar to the data. Again, we're only connecting. Now, the student can follow instructions. They can follow a list of instructions or a video to simply click on the right buttons, following what you're telling them to do. Okay, so in this skill here, they're only following what you're telling them to do. They're not then taking that and evaluating and thinking, well, how can I do that in my business to make my business better? That's where the ability comes in. So once we have this skill, once we have this knowledge, we can then start to evaluate situations so that we can create and modify things for our businesses. And that's what we want our students to do. We want our students to form abilities. So for example, they would then modify the calendar so that it's functional in their business. So for example, you can go and watch an Airtable video and you can learn about the best filters and you can follow their instructions to connect the calendar. But then the ability that you are going to form with further training is taking this skill that you've learned, taking this knowledge that you've absorbed, and then starting to create an ability where you are able to create new things, where you are able to modify new things, where you're able to develop and design. And you're doing that because you're combining your knowledge sets and your skill sets. You combine them together to form your own unique abilities. There is more information on that explanation in the YouTube videos to help you start to identify the difference between a skill and an ability so that you can design this nice flow for your students. So let's then have a look at the final steps for this course. So when you start to create a learning journey for your students, there are 4 steps that I recommend. The first step, focus on the end result. If you have an ambiguous goal, you are going to have an ambiguous course and you're going to have an unstructured course that is just going to confuse the student and give them a cognitive overload where they're absorbing too much information that they don't remember anything. We don't want that. So make sure that your goal is very specific and is action-based because that's the foundation you need. Step 2, break those goals into smaller outcomes. They are your learning outcomes. And then you move into step 3, which is identifying what your students need to learn and practice so that they can achieve these outcomes. So this is your goal, your learning outcomes, and your competencies. Now with those 3, as mentioned in this course, your lessons will help students achieve these. So your lessons will be focusing on what they need to learn and practice. In turn, when they achieve those lessons, they achieve the outcomes and they achieve the goals. So you do this so that you can go into step 4, which is researching and identifying what types of lessons and activities help your students achieve these competencies. In theory, and I guess mathematical, is that if you have 1 course goal, and then you have 3 learning outcomes, and then you have 5 competencies for each learning outcome, your students need to accomplish those 5 competencies. Once they have those 5 competencies, they then automatically achieve the learning outcomes because that's how you packaged it. So think of it like a filter. You're starting with your course goal, and then you're expanding that course goal into mini sub-goals, and then you're expanding that further into competencies so that when you create your lessons, rather than creating lessons for your course goal, you're creating lessons for these small competencies. And that's how you can create these small, structured, and very direct lessons that help your students be able to build the competencies that they need to achieve the overall course goal. If you do not do this, you are going to have a course that is chock-a-block with all of these different types of lessons that don't match up with the competencies that they need. You might then give too much information and overload your courses and then just make it a very confusing mess. So I'm leaving you with those 4 tips. Take the time now to go back and review the course plan you've created so that you can then take these examples and improve what you have. Each week we have new videos that are uploaded to this YouTube channel. So you'll be helping us a lot to subscribe to this channel, but also if you have a topic that you would like covered in this YouTube channel, let me know in the comments below and I'll be happy to record one for you. Until next video, happy course creating!